Good morning, or I should say, good morning. It occurred to me while I was setting up, putting my robes in order, arranging the cushion, and setting up the voice recorder. There's probably more Dharma teaching in that than you'll get in the talk, so the best part is over. I've had some thoughts during this week about conflict. I suppose there are a number of things that started me thinking about conflict. One was the US presidential election, and another was YouTube. There was this short video, 15 minutes or so, that I clicked on. It said Rome versus Macedonia. And you may remember from the previous practice period, I had been watching a Netflix series on the Roman Empire, or the Roman emperors. So I clicked on this, and it was kind of interesting to see what that story was about. And what resulted from it is that into my YouTube feed, whenever I clicked on YouTube, there was all these other battles that were being suggested. And I got this sense of history of just being one battle after another battle. Not always in the same location, but as a species, we seem to have spent a lot of time doing battle with each other. There are the battles between superstates like Rome and Greece, Rome and Egypt, Rome and Persia, the Phoenicians and Greece. That was another one that I watched. The Phoenicians tried to invade Greece, and we've got the Battle of Marathon. Okay. And how the Greek armies defended against the Phoenician, if I have that right, the Phoenician navy. And then after that battle, the navy tried to sail around to Athens to come in that way, and the Greek army marched across the country and defeated them again. And there we have the running a marathon. Okay. From the port of Marathon to the city of Athens. I think it's 42 kilometers, 26 miles. And I don't know how many stadia. So through the centuries, through the millennia, somehow or other we've been engaged in a lot of battles. Even within countries, one city against another city. Nowadays we would have Manchester United versus Leeds United in a game of soccer. A few hundred years ago, it might have been, or half a century ago, it might have been the Duke of Manchester goes to battle with the Duke of Leeds. I don't know if there was a Duke of Leeds, I presume there was. But this resolving of conflict through bloodshed, trying to take what we want from others through violence, and then they having to defend themselves by violence. Mm. YouTube. Will I ever get away from it? Last night I watched another one, said when humans were prey. Okay. And it went into archaeological evidence and records, and it goes back to a time when humans were actually the victims or the prey of extremely large birds and some big cats. And so that the story is that the fact that we were prey to these animals was a big stimulus to our evolution, or to our evolving tenacity. Not so much how to kill each other, but how to avoid being killed, and how to defend ourselves, and that in turn made us better hunters. So I thought, oh gosh, what would it be like to see ourselves as prey to other animals, to live with that hanging over your head? And so in one sense, there has been a description of the human endeavor as a battle against nature, where we try to overcome the impositions of nature. Over the long span of time, we became less and less of a prey to other animals, and secured a food base for ourselves through agriculture, and before that, hunting and gathering. But even as we think of life in India 2,000 years ago, life in America 2,000 years ago, or even 200 years ago, it was still possible that we would be attacked by a large animal and eaten. Bears, wolves, tigers, lions. But by and large, by the time we started to have agriculture, we had more or less stopped being prey for other animals. And securing a food base gave us a tremendous amount of security, except that we had to worry about other people. More so than other animals, we were worried about other people who would want to take our food base away from us. What would the gain be if the Phoenicians had conquered Greece? I can only imagine that, well, it would have meant more food for the Phoenicians and somehow more wealth or whatever, more resources. But I'm not sure if they were running out of resources. Either way, they tried to conquer Greece. So we managed to secure a food base, we managed to settle and have some kind of regularity of life, something less precarious, more secure. You could say that the battle was over, except that we kept doing battle with each other. And we still are doing battle for resources. We still think it's okay to invade another country for their resources. And will this ever stop? I don't know. There are two short stories or anecdotes that came to mind and come to mind in relation to this. The first is not so much related to conflict, but it does involve one of the great conquerors of the ancient world. And I'm not sure if the story is historically accurate. It doesn't have to be to understand the message. So there was this Greek philosopher named Diogenes, and some of you may know more about him than I do, but apparently he practiced renunciation and is reported to have lived in a barrel. I don't know. Okay, I'll take that as true. He lived in a barrel. And he is renowned for having said, everything is in a state of flux. Oh, that was Heraclitus, wasn't it? I think Diogenes said the same thing too. And the story goes that Alexander the Great was passing by at some stage. And you may know that Alexander was tutored by Aristotle. And apparently they didn't get along very well. I can imagine the difference in temperament was significant. But maybe Alexander had some lingering doubts about his relationship with Aristotle. And as he was passing nearby this renowned philosopher called Diogenes, who lived in a barrel, he decided to see if this philosopher was A, anything like Aristotle, or if he could come to some understanding with this philosopher. So, he pays Diogenes a visit, and I imagine Alexander coming with a retinue, with like a group of warriors, and they're all on horses. Don't know. So here you have, at the time, the most powerful person in the world, or at least in the Greek world, talking to this renunciate. And Alexander, when he's leaving, says, Is there anything I can do for you? So you've got this person living in a barrel, not too sure how he's getting his food and clothes, how he's managing to eke out a living. And you've got the most powerful man in the world saying, is there anything I can do for you? It must be it's like one of the gods saying, is there anything I can do for you? Or the genie that comes out of a bottle, is there anything I can do for you? And Diogenes reportedly said, step aside, you're blocking the sun. Okay, I like that story. You're blocking the sun, it's like you're distracting me or you're in my way. I'm doing what I actually want to do, enjoying nature or enjoying what life has to offer. Don't bother me with such questions. And I also like it because it suggests that even though he was a renunciate and had nothing worth counting, he still had his satisfaction and his independence, his contentment. So that's one. Step aside. You're blocking the sun. The other is kind of a similar story, kind of similar. The story goes in ancient India at the time of the Buddha. There was this king who had made up his mind to invade a neighboring territory, and the Buddha was nearby. And the story goes that the Buddha started meditating under I think it was a dead tree, and continued to meditate. And eventually the king with his army was passing. And the king was kind of struck by this sight of a monk meditating on a blistering hot day under a dead tree. So he goes over to the Buddha and says, shouldn't you find another tree, one that has shade? I mean, why are you sitting out here under a blazing hot sun meditating? And the Buddha says something like, although the day is hot, I am cool within, or my passions have been cooled. And reportedly the king was struck so much by this phrase, this statement of the Buddha, that he called off the advance and went home. I guess when he got home, he was questioning himself and said, why did I do that? Why did I let that guy distract me the way he did? And so he went back the next day, and the Buddha was sitting under the tree again, but this time he ignored and just continued on to invade the new territory. So although it is hot outside, my passions have been cooled, or I am cool within. It's in conflict, particularly in conflict with ourselves, that we grow. When we are in conflict, we are at the edge of our practice. But to be in conflict with other people, that's more difficult. It's how do we take care of our practice when we are in conflict with other people. Having secured a kind of regularity in life where food is not so much of an issue, we can be reasonably sure that we'll have food for the short to middle term future. We don't have to go out hunting today as a matter of survival. We're not faced with a famine and a sudden shortage of food that causes us to disperse looking for food to gather. So we've achieved a certain security. That gives us an opportunity to say, what is the nature of life? What is life about? How did life start? What is the best thing that we can do with our life? What is the right thing, some people have asked, to do with their life? It's in that security that we have the bandwidth or the space to question things, to speculate, to wonder, and to contemplate. I really take a lot of inspiration from a line in one of Kurosawa's movies, The Seven Samurai, where one of the seven samurai says, I live to perfect my practice. And then in the meal chant at a Zen center, there is the line that says, we eat to support life and to practice the way of Buddha. So here we have two things that express the importance of practice. We eat to support life and to practice the way of Buddha. That's like saying we live to support life and to practice the way of Buddha. So in that statement, it's practicing the way of Buddha that makes our life meaningful and worthwhile. For other people, it may be practicing one of the arts or a multitude of arts. It may be family, it may be career, anything. But at least in the practice period and in the meal chant, we say, we live to support life and to practice the way of Buddha. And in the samurai case, I live to perfect my practice. So that's where my constant effort is going. To study, in the samurai's case, swordsmanship, and to perfect it. In our case, to study the Buddha way and to perfect our practice of it. So how do we do that? Now that we are at a place where life isn't a struggle, if you're under too much pressure if survival is too much of an issue, yes, you can practice in that situation, but it is very difficult. So now that we're in a position where survival is not so much of a struggle, it's not a daily battle. Now that we have space provided by civilization, what do we do with it? It's kind of easier when we're struggling because it's clear what we do. Avoid getting eaten, and try to get food for yourself. The imperatives are clear. In order to survive, you must do this. But when you have secured your base, secured your camp, what then makes life worthwhile and meaningful? What completes your life? What makes it whole? And when we experience a conflict within, we're at the cutting edge of our practice. That gives us something to practice with. So there's a phrase from Nietzsche that comes in very nicely here, fits in very nicely. And it's the only way in which I would like to apply it. He said, you should desire war more than peace. Or you should desire conflict more than peace. So in this sense, yes, I desire to be at the cutting edge of my practice. It's not that I actually want to start a fight with my neighbor, break in to their house and steal something. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to war. Not a real war, not that kind of thing. But I do want to know where the edge of my practice is. I do want to feel as though I'm conflicted about something. I'm looking for my way forward. I've got something to work with, as it were. So he says you should want war more than peace. And then he says, or you should desire war more than peace, and the short peace more than the long peace. So he's really going for this pro-conflict kind of life. Always be at the edge. Yes, have peace and enjoy it, but don't get stuck there. And that's one of the phrases that comes up in Zen from time to time. Don't get stuck in enlightenment. Yeah. Enjoy your enlightenment, but don't get stuck there. There's another interesting aside from this. These two little stories. And not just these two little stories, but other Zen koans, where Ingen says too busy and Tao Wu says there's one who is not busy. And Ingen says, well, in that case, there are two moons. And Tao Wu holds up the broom and says, which moon is this? So in all these little stories, there's an interesting question. In all these stories, there is an interesting question. As you hear the story, who do you identify with? Or in whose position do you see yourself? Usually, as we hear the story, we want to be the person who is, for want of a better word, the hero of the story. We want to be Diogenes saying to Alexander, "Step aside, you're blocking the sun." We don't want to be Alexander hearing that kind of rebuttal. We want to be the Buddha saying to the king, "Although it is a hot day, I am cool within." Or we want to be Dao Wu saying to Ingen, "Which broom is this?" And maybe the stories are constructed in that way, that we will want to be on the good side. We want to be on the smart side, right? Be like Dao Wu. Be like Diogenes. Be smart. Be clever. But in living to perfect our practice, or living to support life and to practice the way of Buddha, we have to keep coming back to ourselves. And a great help in that is not to be on the smart side, not to be on the clever side, but to be on the receiving side. To feel the conflict of Dao Wu saying to you, "Which moon is this?" To feel the conflict of the king with an army and finding yourself arrested by the presence of this person sitting under the tree. What can we learn from that? And what kind of conflict does it put you in if you are Alexander and this strange old guy says to you, "Step aside, you're blocking the sun"? So maybe there's something to be learned from putting ourselves in both situations. In hearing the story from Diogenes' perspective, and in hearing the story from Alexander's perspective. But in that, we're hearing the story as ourselves and imagining ourselves in that situation or in the other situation. Letting the story stir things up within us, and perhaps even generate within us a little bit of conflict. The conflict then that needs to be somehow brought to resolution or resolved. In Rinzai, koans are the tool of conflict. of stirring things up. And in Soto, I like to say, life brings its own koans. You don't have to go to a teacher looking for them. Life brings them to you. All the little dilemmas of our life. What is it that makes life worthwhile? What is it that I should be doing with my life? What do I do to make my life feel more meaningful or to feel more engaged? What do I do next? How do I be me? Suzuki Roshi says in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, usually when somebody practices a religion, they become like an arrow pointing away from themselves. They're usually pointing to the ism or to the theology, to the thing that that religion is. But in our practice, the arrow is pointing towards the self. We're not saying what Buddhism is. We're saying what I am, what you are, what it is to be me, what it is to be you. We keep coming back to this simple truth of being and becoming. Thank you all very much.